All right. Um, Also, what I've noticed at your site was that you guys offer a lot of research material. You've got a button there that sends you off to some peer-reviewed research, I believe.
Yeah, we actually, so this is another one where we were approached by a group in the city of Vancouver that collects and disseminates peer-reviewed research on various drug policy and prohibition-related topics. And they said, look, we need a way of getting this out. We have 700 articles. They're incredibly useful, but, the only people who ever see them are health researchers. And so we've been working with them. We update it every couple of weeks. New articles get added. And it's now over 700 megabytes in size. We have, I think the last count, I actually have to update the text. It's like 845 peer-reviewed articles on cannabis, on psychedelics, on medical cannabis specifically, regulatory regimes. It's actually an incredible resource that I found very useful and kind of came out of the ether to us. We were quite lucky.
Yes, yes, because all the information that we can get out to people, all the everybody, better everybody will be. I just got someone coming in the door here. Come on in. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. Okay. How can someone join White Prohibition? Because it sounds like you got an awful lot of tools there.
Yeah, all they have to, there's multiple, we've made it really easy. There's multiple ways of signing up right on the front page there. If they sign up, they want to create a user, they can then use a lot more of the tools directly. If they just want to join to kind of find out what other people are doing, they can just go up to the top right-hand corner of the screen and enter their information.
Alrighty. Okay. Let's move on to our cannabis laws and where they are, what's going on with them right now in this bill. Is it C10 or S10? It's changed so many numbers.
Yeah, it was, so the letter C or S simply indicates whether it starts in C, the Parliament or Commons, or at the Senate. So initially it was C26, then C15, then S10, then C10, and now it is simply law.
Just simply law. And a lot of people would know of our laws as, you could get busted for jail. Our old law was some people could get up to 7 years in jail was the maximum. Some people were sort of treated lightly. And now how is that new law? That everybody's treated the same right across the board, mandatory minimums and stuff like that?
Yeah, so what the conservatives did is double the maximum sentence for a series of penalties. We're talking about primarily, as it pertains to the cannabis community, is production, where there's a mandatory minimum for 6 or greater plants, is the initial category. There's another for over 200 plants, and I believe over 500 is the last one. I kind of stopped looking at that point because it gets a bit too depressing. And then, of course, if you're trafficking in over 3 kilograms, there's a mandatory minimum. And then a host of kind of exceptional clauses, like if you are a renter, the mandatory minimum goes up by 50%. If you are proximate to places frequented by minors, it goes up by 50%. Those kind of clauses essentially capture everybody without actually looking like they do. A renter, that's like 40-something% in an urban area, and higher elsewhere in suburban areas. And then you have frequented by minors is an ill-defined term. So really, sidewalks are frequented by minors, obviously parks.
Exactly.
But without an actual definition in law, which there is not one, those kind of clauses can be applied quite differently across the country. And it's also worth noting that there's an escape clause that can be used by federal prosecutors, wherein they must ask for a mandatory minimum to be applied. And so if they just fail to ask for that, the mandatory minimum doesn't apply, and so what you really end up with is ultimately the same system in places like Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, where enlightened prosecutors say, we're not going to apply that mandatory minimum. But in smaller towns, and especially kind of the exurbs of the far suburbs, you end up with incredibly harsh sentences. 6 months or 9 months in jail for growing 6 marijuana plants. And of course, with the new medical marijuana framework coming in, you're going to end up with a lot of people, 19,000 currently legal medical marijuana users, approximately 12,000 growers are overnight going to become illegal and subject to those mandatory minimums.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you answered a few of my questions there. I was going to ask you how it was going to affect us as far as our medical people when these laws come in, especially with that proposed plan. Now, is there any way that the people that are licensed now, will there be any chance of grandfathering them in? Sort of like when you see like Irv Rosenfeld down in the States, he's grandfathered in for their cannabis use. Would there be any chance of growers that are now growing? Is that something that would have to go before the courts and to be argued before the courts?
Well, it's a complicated question. I'll try not to go on and on about it, but this is kind of the issue du jour for us.
Okay.
So, first of all, I'll address the courts issue. There is no right in Canada for something to be cheap or free. So there's a case called the Atten case out of British Columbia, where a group of parents of autistic children sued the BC government and asked for a very expensive and very effective procedure to be provided for their children. That went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and what the Supreme Court said, in short, is just because the government has a jurisdiction over something does not mean they have to make it cost effective. And this really goes back to the initial discussions around the creation of the Charter of Rights, where Trudeau actively avoided putting property rights or economic rights into the Charter. So there's not a real mechanism for us to apply for a right to grow from the courts. When it comes down to, at least not on a financial basis, there's also, did you need to pause there?
No. I'm just curious on something. Go ahead.
When it comes to a right to grow, there's never actually been a right to grow in this country. What there has been is, under Parker, the initial medical marijuana case, a right to access medical marijuana, and under HITSIG 1 and 2, there was a finding that the current system of access, which then did not even include pre-plan systems, it was simply, you have a card, go to the street and buy it from a dealer, that was deemed unconstitutional. The federal government under the Christian Liberals created this system of self-production, but there's never been a right for it. So between that and the economic problem, we really don't have many options at the Supreme Court, at least that others can see, that would give us that right to produce. So that answers the court side. Now, when it comes to, is there a chance politically, I won't be too flippant, but I mean, you gotta cover your bases. Is there a chance? Yes. Is it a good one? Absolutely not. It is as close to zero as you can get under the rules of quantum physics. Is probably the best way of putting it. This government under Stephen Harper has zero interest in making this policy work. They have zero interest in helping medical marijuana or marijuana people in general. And in fact, ironically, you guys are in the area that they appeal to. This part of Ontario that is east and somewhat north of Toronto, the 905, is actually the area of the country they appeal to with their drug policy. And that area of the country has zero interest in the polling data at seeing a workable medical marijuana program. Generally speaking, it's some of the lowest support for medical marijuana. So Stephen Harper has zero reason to make this program work, and every reason to just basically tell us to flip off. And that's a real sad thing. And that's part of the reason why you've seen a lot less out of me on Twitter about federal politics, because after the last election, we really lost our chance with this majority government. Our best options are provincial and municipal.
Yeah.
We've got Vancouver here. We have 14 dispensaries now. None of them are being touched in the city of Vancouver proper because we have an enlightened city government. There are opportunities for provincial governments to get involved. When it comes to the federal government, I really am sad to say there is not much we can do short of replacing them in the next election.
Yes, it's hopefully we can get a change in the government in the next 3 years so that things will change. What I noticed when you were at the expo as well in Toronto, there was the Young Liberal Party had a booth, End Prohibition had a booth. I got a tweet from the Young Greens afterwards. They're interested in a booth. So there are political parties that are getting involved. So let's hope that 3 years down the road that things will be better for us.
Well, it's
Uh,
going to take all of us. I mean, this is the reality of politics is that it requires politicians. They require two things, well, three things. The first one's votes, and we've demonstrated there's not enough of us voting to bring us over the top to get rid of Harper. But the second two things they need are donations, and the even more important is volunteers. Every medical marijuana user in Canada went out and volunteered for the Liberals, for the NDP, or for the Greens, all three of whom support a regulated system of access, and we would actually be moving in the right direction. But as of right now, we aren't getting that. Our community is not meaningfully participating in the political process, which really, unfortunately, does not give us a lot of leverage over these politicians.
Correct. Correct. Well, that's why we need more people to get out there and advocate and educate, so more people know. Back to Bill C-10. Um, the mandatory minimums. If you mentioned about the prosecutors have to ask for it and stuff, will that law be harder on people who are, let's say, have less chance, who can afford a lawyer, a proper lawyer to protect them? Will they suffer more under the mandatory minimum
Oh, of
bill
course.
being?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, it's make no mistake. I mean, the justice system in this country and frankly around the world is biased against people who are a lower economic status and people who are non-majority ethnicity. If you are First Nations or you are Vietnamese and or you are poor, you are absolutely going to be treated worse in this bill. It's a disgusting fact of our society and one that people rarely like to talk about. But you simply need to look at the disproportionate number of First Nations or Vietnamese people in jail to realize that our court system is as racist as, frankly, society. And it goes just as much towards people who are of a lower economic status.
Okay.
The bearer of good news.
You're very. Hey, we're asking questions. We're getting the answers we're looking for. Did you hear that comment on the announcement by the government? Vic Taves was saying there the other day how they had saved $1.4 billion with these new laws already.
Yeah, that was the biggest pile of bullshit I've ever seen. That was impressive. He has they've shut down a bunch of jails. They're now double bunking inmates. You've got reports coming out from the jail guards saying that violence against guards and other inmates is on the rise because of double bunking. You have the John Howard Society decrying it, and that he has the gall to come out and say, well, the sky hasn't fallen yet, is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It takes more than a few months for a meaningful number of people to go from charges to jail. I think anyone who's been through the court system knows it takes more than a couple months to get a guilty verdict. And for God's sake, for him to say that it is such a pile of bullshit that he absolutely knows. The man is a former lawyer, for goodness sake. And he just...
Oh, he wants to be a judge.
And this is the problem. I mean, it's that so many Canadians are not up to date on these issues, and frankly, nor can we expect them to be. I mean, you can't expect everyone to be an expert on everything. But the
That's right.
have become experts at taking that and running with it. So they just say things that are utterly ridiculous to people who have knowledge. But to the average layperson, it's like, well, the sky didn't fall, so, everything must be working great. Way to go, Vic Taves. On a personal note, I've met the